So I'm Liz Rosenthal, I'm the founder and CEO of Power to the Pixel, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to three great panelists today who have been leading the way in supporting new types of media formats and new types of storytelling and engagement tools. So first is Lili Blumers, who's head of ARTE web commissioning from Paris. Welcome, Lili. Next is Lisa Lazareck, who is Grants Advisor from the Wellcome Trust, based in London. And third is Liz Cook from Kickstarter, who's the film outreach lead, who's based in New York City. So actually, we wanted to know something about you as well, just so we know who we are talking to and hopefully with at the end of the session, because we're going to do 10-minute presentations, 10 to 15-minute presentations, each speaker, and then we're going to try and do a Q&A and conversation with you. So in the room, who here is a filmmaker? So mostly producer? Any distributors? Exhibitors? Anyone from the games or interactive world? Great. Anyone from the finance who's financing and funding projects? Great. Thank you. And sorry if I've missed you out. So before we start, I wanted to just tell you something about Power to the Pixel and about what we're doing. So it'd be great if we could just start the slides. Thank you. And also sort of like relate it to why we're talking about this today. So at Power to the Pixel, we set up in 2007, and our mission really is to help film and media companies adapt to digital change and changing audiences. We help producers and companies create, finance, and distribute projects that engage today's audiences in the places and spaces and platforms and devices they now use. We do two main things. We help develop projects through our development labs and through consulting as well. And we also help broker relationships, business relationships, between talent and producers and different types of financiers from right across the different media industry silos. So our main annual development lab is called the Pixel Lab, that we run every year from June to October, where we select about 20 producers with projects and 20 media professionals without projects, and we have a very special methodology and intensive development process that we take the participants on, which ends in October at our main annual centrepiece event, Power to the Pixel, the Cross Media Forum, that we run in association with the BFI London Film Festival. And we've been running this, it's our 9th year this year, and it consists of a conference day, a think tank, and a marketplace where we select around 35 projects from around the world and we introduce them to different types of potential finance partners and co-producers. These are some of the kind of people who come. So you'll see it's right across film, television, arts companies, advertising agencies, games publishers and platforms, the arts world and the publishing world. And we feel it's super important that you bring all these different types of financiers together to talk about how they're going to work together when these kind of like projects are addressing many different types of audiences and platforms. So on the seats there's some information about the event. If you want to apply to the market with a project, please come and speak to me or to Liz Scott, who's sitting over there, who's one of the team, who's a production manager at Power to the Pixel. And if you come to the market, you get all kinds of things, and networking events and an opportunity to meet many people from around the world. So the deadline's on the 16th of July. And we also, this year, we're doing a Latin American focus. I don't know if there's anyone there from the whole region, but we have special awards that if you're interested in applying to come from the British Council. So we have 16 awards of £1,500 to help you get to Power to the Pixel. So one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about is how these projects are going to get financed. This is such a new area. And a lot of the time we're still siloed in media industries where there's a very sort of traditional template for financing and distributing projects. So what happens when you move into a different world, when the boundaries are blurred? We find it's really important that we bring commissioners and financiers to discuss these kind of things, and we have a think tank at the end of Power to the Pixel where we have about 40 financiers and commissioners who take part, and we publish a report. So every year you can read that on our website, so feel free to go on the website. All the previous years is there. So it's kind of interesting just seeing what they think and what they recommend and how they're moving forward. So just a little about the context of today's talk is every media industry is trying to find a new business model with our sort of changing audiences and digital change. And in the past, all of these business models are really defined by their media. So the film industry, the television industry, the publishing industry, and recently the games industry. And now we know that sort of these boundaries have been blurred between what those things mean. Stories and ideas now today no longer exist on single media formats or platforms. Audiences are shifting effortlessly between one place and one device to the next. Stories have become something that are living entities that are shared and discussed and remixed in many different places. And we've moved from this model where there are very few platforms, few gatekeepers, running times and release windows, which kind of restricted the way that stories were shared, told, and delivered. And now we have more stories, more storytellers, and more ways to tell stories than ever before. And that means that the price of content has dropped, but the value of engaging audiences and people's attention has risen. So that means as kind of creatives and storytellers, we have to be much more focused on what people are doing and how they're engaging with audiences now, today, instead of just thinking about this kind of template, which we were used to when we were making film or television formats. And we have to be a lot more sort of user-centric or more people-centric, thinking very much about the behaviours and motivations of the people we're trying to communicate with, and then sort of thinking about how we communicate with them, what platform we choose. So that's something at Power to the Pixel we spend quite a lot of time trying to get our storytellers to think like. And it kind of also means there's a very new business approach and development approach to project development and finance. But the way that projects are being developed and financed still, I think, hasn't really changed that much. We think about audience engagement right at the end of the process, or marketing, that's what people call it. And we're still developing projects really in a vacuum. So where you start with, one media that you're interested in, a film and television format, and then you're working in a kind of business-to-business environment where very few people are working together making decisions about how a project develops, a script develops, or a story develops, how it's financed, whether it's going to work in the business-to-business environment, and then you hopefully get your project made, you take it to a festival or a market, and it's only at the point when you hopefully find a distributor or you self-distribute it that you think about your audience. And usually in the filmmaking process, if you're lucky, that's kind of around 5 years from the point of the concept, when you're early concept to point of sale, and that's a huge amount of time when you think about how things are changing in terms of how audiences are engaging and how technology is changing. So, and we found even in the cross-platform world, when people start to think broader than single formats, we've often found this approach is still the same, that people are working within a vacuum, or there's one particular media product or format that people are using, and anything else they're making around it that are kind of extensions of the idea, or interactive ideas or games or websites, are often seen as secondary, and they're not integrated into the project development. So a lot of the time, their financing is, it's small, or it's seen as secondary. You have to raise the money for the film or television project that's sitting in the middle before you get the interactive part. A lot of time, you make it very last minute. And a lot of these projects have been very hard for them to find audiences, to build traction. And a lot of the time, you'll find, there are people who say, cross-media approaches or transmedia or whatever people are calling it doesn't work. And I think a lot of the time it's because the approach has not been strategic. So what we're trying to do at the lab, and what we would discuss a lot with people we're working with and backers and financiers and supporters is how you can work in a much more user-centric, people-centric way, where you think about your project, you think about the core of your project, you think about the sort of main themes of your project in a kind of platform agnostic sense, and you think very carefully about who you're trying to engage with. And after you've sort of worked that out and the idea of sort of user journeys and how you engage people and how you're going to engage them, it's then you start designing the platform or the interface where you're going to start engaging them first. So we're very much about, strategically thinking idea first and people, and then think about how you're going to engage them and grow your idea. So could project development finance look something like this, instead of that blue diagram, where you start, you sort of strip back to core ideas, you build a kind of plan, a strategic plan of where and how you're going to engage your audience in the first place, how you're going to grow your idea or grow your brand. You rapidly prototype your idea, you test out some kind of element of it, or you choose a sort of minimum viable product, which is a word that you hear a lot in the technology world. And tech startups often throw out prototypes or alphas or betas into the world to see how they work. So you're audience testing something very early on, and you sort of like learn from the feedback and the data you get from this kind of audience testing to see whether your idea has traction or whether you should change it, and then sort of use that to sort of build finance or investment and do it over a very short amount of time. So that's the kind of things we're thinking out of the Pixel. And during the panel, obviously, each of the panelists comes from a different background. So Lili's from a broadcaster, Lisa's from a theme-specific fund, and Liz is from, obviously, one of the most important crowdfunding sites, which is very much working, I think, in this kind of like fits very much of what Kickstarter means. So it'd be really nice to, while we're maybe in the discussion afterwards, we sort of maybe can try and address some of the ideas, whether these are possible within the environments you're working in, and also discuss it in the audience. So I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to hand over to Lili, who's going to tell us about the kind of projects and the kind of finance they're investing in projects in ARTE. Sorry, I'm so used to Keynote. There you go.
Okay, so I work for ARTE, and I think in order to understand our digital strategy, it's important to know what ARTE is and where it comes from. So ARTE is a European cultural channel that has been, and a public service broadcaster that has been created by German and French government in order to promote European culture. So this is something that necessarily orients our topics. So we are not addressed to a national audience. ARTE is a non-commercial television channel. I should maybe switch to the first slide. So we essentially broadcast without any advertising. And 95% of the financing comes from license fees from France and Germany. And ARTE is also a channel who has a quite small TV audience, actually only 2% of the market share in the French market and even less in Germany, only 1%. So digital platforms have been really early considered to be a way of compensating this small audience. So we were always, since the beginning, seeking to maximize the audience on digital platforms. So ARTE was the first French public TV channel to offer a catch-up service, free catch-up service, and really early in 2007 started to produce web content, and we started a real web production activity in 2008 with our first web documentary with Gaza. Maybe some of you have heard of it. And since then, we've co-produced over 50 web documentaries and news stories and fictional works. And, and the specific mission of ARTE is the financing of ARTE is to support authors, creators, and independent production, and that is something really important to know. So we always try to work with different producers, with small producers, but also with big producers. But we really try to diversify as much as possible. So ARTE website is actually sorted in thematic platforms. So there's ARTE Concert for performing arts, ARTE Cinema for content dedicated around our movie programmation, because ARTE is also an important film production entity, and so we try to enrich this activity. ARTE Info is for social issues, ARTE Future is for science investigation formats, and ARTE Creative is for all the rest. It's for creative formats and contemporary pop art. So the range of what we produce is very large. So it goes from fictional web series, mainly French, because we are ARTE France, but also European, some European acquisitions. We always have a look at what's going on in the web production sector in Spain or Italy and other European countries. We also produce short documentary and animated series and digital formats to enrich the viewing experience of our TV programs on our channel, or second screen features, sorry. We also started quite recently to co-produce video games. So we released a video game 2 years ago called Typewriter, about typography, the history of typography, and we have several video games in production. One it's an explorational game about inspired by Philip K. Dick. It has a very strong visual artwork done by a French comic illustrator called Olivier Bonhomme. It's associated actually to a documentary he was presented here in the festival about Philip K. Dick. And what our approach in video games is quite similar to our approach in other interactive creations. We really want to support artists and independent creators. So we really collaborating with the independent game industry is really a great opportunity, because we met so many interesting people, and it opens so many doors for collaborations. Something else, we also try to innovate and fund new formats and find every way. Well, so one of these experiences is haiku, the interactive haiku, which is also in competition of the, I don't know if you've seen it at the Millennium Gallery. Actually, the idea behind this was that the internet is really the media of short formats, and people don't necessarily have half an hour to spend to look to a web documentary and come back every week. So we tried to host this collection of 12 really, really short interactive formats. They have to be shorter. Every one of them is shorter than 1 minute, and they are more like little games. It was a co-production between the with the NFB and an in-house production. And web documentaries, of course, are still a major axis of our digital strategy, program strategy. There we co-produced Fort McMoney. I don't know if you've heard of it. It was a game documentary where the player could influence on an environmental issue. I'm sorry. It was also a Franco-Canadian co-production with the NFB, and had large funding support, a huge audience success as well. Yes, thank you. Another example, we also explore virtual reality and immersive storytelling forms. So ARTE bought the license to Polar Sea. It's a 10-part documentary series about the polar exploration of the Polar Sea in a 360 app and a 360 player, and we have other VR projects to come in development and in production. Another example of a web documentary, or a recent web native documentary, because we can we can either co-produce web native projects or link to a television program. Both is possible. So this is an example of another Franco-Canadian co-production called Do Not Track. It was a large association of different broadcasters, public broadcasters. UPion was the producer, Bayerischer Rundfunk, NFB, and ARTE again. And there was also association with Radio Canada, AG Plus, and RTS, and with the support of the CNC and the Tribeca Film Institute. So this is, it started as a project based on an idea of Brett Gaylor. He then co-developed the idea with the NFB and with ARTE. And the idea of the producer UPion was to associate all these different funders, not only for funding, but also for addressing their audience in a different way and distributing their content in a very personalized way, because every country has a different version of the web documentary, and the web documentary, as it is personalized, addresses the viewer in a very, taking into account his, of course, his personal navigate information and data. So that is an example of personalized storytelling. And the last example I wanted to show is a cross-media project, actually. Called Notes on Blindness. It's in production. It's early in production. It's going to be shot this summer, and it's actually a British project. So there's it started as a short feature film that has been showcased on OpDocs, New York Times, and it was also at the Sundance 2014 festival. And it's actually an immersion in the personal experience of John Hull, who became blind in the early 80s, and he audio taped his personal experience on audio tapes every day during several years. So there's this whole audio recording, and the film fictionalizes the story out of and what we want to do in the interactive project is to offer an audio experience that takes sorry. Based actually on the narration of his personal experiences, and to show through small interactions and gameplays to illustrate what he's describing. So it's this 3D audio sound based on binaural sound technology, which and real-time audio recordings illustrate what he describes. So this is one scene, and there are several others with different gameplays focusing on other interactions. And yes, that was the last example I wanted to show you.
Great, thank you. So as you see, ARTE were very early on starting to support different types of projects, and now have a huge spectrum of the kind of work they're working on. So it's kind of unusual still in that space for a broadcaster, but we can talk a bit about that later maybe, and we'll move on. to Lisa. Are you okay about Lisa, your presentation? Do you want me to
I'm great. Cool. Thanks. Hi. Nothing back. It's a quiet crowd. How many people here have heard of the Wellcome Trust by hands? Quite a few. How many came to the earlier funding session that I spoke at? So I can repeat a little with apologies. The Wellcome Trust is a global charitable foundation. It's dedicated to improving health. It's the third largest charity in the world and has a private endowment of about £18 billion. And every year we give away £750 million, not personally, there's a lot of us, on the Euston Road for biomedical research to improve human health, animal health. We have humanities and social science research. We do education, public engagement, and the applications of research to medicine. So a percentage of what we fund annually is towards the engagement of the public with science, and we do that with sort of four main communities. We work with the arts community, researchers who want to go above and beyond their research to engage the public with what they do, science communicators, and you people. So I work in the broadcast, games, and film team, and we're interested in cross-platform and multi-platform projects. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what we do, but I wanted to talk about the team and what we're trying to achieve in broadcast, games, and film. So we're trying to get science as part of the cultural conversation. It's not about didactic explanations of science or a history of medicine. It can be. So people always come up to me and say, oh, so you fund educational, like television or educational films. If it's educational, I'm not really supposed to be touching it. First and foremost, it's entertainment. We do have funds for educational film, educational projects, websites, going into schools and talking about elements of science. That's fabulous. But within broadcast, games, and film, we're after projects that are for audience, entertainment-seeking audiences. We're looking for fresh approaches to stories. We do have funding available because we're funders, and it's really threefold. If you want to write down, I have the address, I think, on another slide, but it's welcome.ac.uk/broadcast. Very easy to find. Welcome's with 2 L's. We have development, co-production, and outreach and dissemination funding. All the deadlines are online. We've got a team that specializes in each area, and my job is to talk about grants and what makes something competitive for the Wellcome Trust and of interest. In terms of eligibility, I thought I would mention that sort of upfront because a lot of people have questions about what makes their project eligible and what does biomedical science mean. Essentially, we're looking for projects that are innovative, which is a funny word. What exactly does that mean? You probably get that all the time. Where's the innovation? Where's the story? We're looking for projects that look at science and its impact on society, whether that's social, cultural, economical, political, you name it. What are the ramifications for a UK audience of vaccine trial in Kenya? What makes that story interesting to people in the UK? So our eligibility is you need to find a UK audience or the Republic of Ireland. The topics can be international, but again, we look for, you'll see on the website that the sort of needs co-producer within the UK because we're trying to make sure that you find the UK audience because that's our remit. And that umbrella of biomedical science is really quite broad. It can be didactic explanations of what is a genome, but it can also be about the implications of closing down NHS hospitals in your local community and what does that mean for the health of your kids. There's lots of questions that we're looking to answer. Interestingly, it's the wider issues that we're keen on exploring. To some extent, we do expect matched funding if you come to us for co-production because we're looking for projects that are reaching mass audiences. We want to fund great things that people see. So this idea of thinking about who your audience is and how they're going to get to your project, they're really, really important. And because we are a biomedical research charity, we expect all projects to have experts on board, and we want to know how you'll collaborate with these experts. What are the questions that you want your audience who are using your cross-platform project, what are the questions that you want them to be engaging with? What are they, and what's your story, and how does that all fit together? We do a lot of partnership building at the Wellcome Trust. We do a lot of direct activities. like our work with mentoring at World Congress of Science and Factual Producers. DocFest is actually supported by the Wellcome Trust through one of our grant schemes. And we also, again, it's this idea of non-traditional formats for science. We know that it's getting harder and harder to get science on screen in more traditional forms. So we're very open. So there's no black and white answer about what we will fund. So you might have to ask me later if your project is eligible. But what I would encourage people to do is if they have good ideas, have a conversation with the Trust. We have lots of people who are able to advise about eligibility. And I'm going to give you a few examples of what we funded. So you can see what we fund can be quite broad, anything from short animation to factual series. We've recently we did our first feature with electricity. I'm going to talk about a couple of examples. Am I okay for time? Great. So in terms of money that we've funded, I don't want to confuse things too much, but everything is on our website with the deadlines listed. But we provide development, co-pro, and outreach and dissemination. You can see the values here. Development money is very interesting because it's really tailored. How do you go from point A to point B with your project? How do you get more money? What do you need to make to get your project to the next level? So for us, we fund about 10 projects a year for development, but because it's so tailored, we have a decent success rate in comparison to some of these commissioners who get pitched hundreds and hundreds of projects and can only fund a few. With that, I should say that we're not here to supplement commissioners' budgets. The Wellcome Trust is trying to get science, that's our brief, we're trying to get it part of society, we're trying to take the best ideas and get them out there, which I'm sure all of you are trying to do as well. I mentioned the co-production already before. There's 4 deadlines a year for up to 40K, and there's one big pot of money for really interesting science on screen that we usually give away one a year to up to 300K. And then once, if you're thinking already ahead in terms of how your project can reach different audiences, you can come to us for outreach and dissemination. Here's an example of this wonderful project that is actually about grandparents signing their kids up with missions. Has anyone heard of Ginger Snap Adventures? No? Okay. Check it out, gingersnapadventures.com. It's very simple to find. I think that's the right website. But this one's really cool in the sense that they have a medical mission, so the grandparents can actually buy something that their grandkids who don't live with them can play, and then the grandkids can do the actual mission. I think this one, the one that we funded, is about Jon Snow, so it's looking at epidemiology, questions about disease, and then depending on what the kids do and what they find, feedback gets sent to the grandparents, so it's quite a nice way of, they look really happy, at least on the screen. So apparently it's quite fun. I don't think it's actually ready just yet, the medical mission that we funded, but the website is live for this one. An example of a development award that's been successful is, and I wanted to show this because it's an interesting project, because it came to us with this idea that the filmmaker, is she here, Nina? No, okay. Chloe? No, nobody's here. They came to us with this idea that they wanted to prove to the BBC that they could make a short film, part of the My Life CBBC series about Alzheimer's told from a kid's perspective. No, it's too hard, it's too sad, it's too tough. And they came to us to say, look, we really like development money because we want to show that our concept could work. And actually it did, and they got the commission, and it's a wonderful short film. So that's an example of actually where they needed the money for development. In terms of the BBC, they won't accept our co-production funds. It hasn't changed. I think if those who have heard Wellcome speak before, that's not changed yet. When it does, we'll let you know. But you can come to us for development money if you're seeking to go to the BBC for a commission. Neurocomics is an awesome project if you're into adult comic reading. It's also one of the most beautiful comic books I've ever seen. This group came to us, 2 PhD researchers from UCL who actually wanted to make a comic to give away at museums, at festivals, and it ended up getting picked up by Nobrow, which is one of the foremost prominent, eminent graphic novel publishers in the UK. And they made this wonderful book which has been translated into 9 different languages, or I think it will be into 9. Okido, has anyone heard of Okido? If you go to Waterstones, it's the most amazing publication. It's a little magazine for primary school kids. we at the Wellcome Trust and in our team, we've actually funded more multi-platform projects than crossover projects. So Okido is a really good example of this because it did very well as a magazine publication, and now it's been picked up by CBBC to be a short animated series. So there will be inevitable crossover because if people watch the animation, they might want to buy the publication, but they're both working on their separate platforms. So I guess that's a challenge to the audience, that if you can come up with great crossover projects, we'd really love to see them. But we're also interested in multi-platform. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think this is my last example. This is one of our large co-production awards, which has been commissioned by CITV. And it's Horrible Science. Any nods of the heads familiar with Horrible Science, the series? Wonderful books to read when you need a bit of light and gruesome reading. But this is something that we've put in a large co-production money into. And again, this idea that the books have been successful on their own platform, and now it's coming to television. And that's with Ben Miller and John Pocock. I think that's it for me for now. Thanks. Okay.
And last we're going to move on to Liz Cook, who's going to tell us about the types of cross-platform and interactive projects that they've been financing or helping finance at Kickstarter.
Yes. Let's see. Do I go like maybe down here? Yeah. Perfect. Hello, my name's Liz Cook. I work at Kickstarter. I'm a film outreach lead there. Have any of you guys backed projects on Kickstarter before? Cool. Has anybody run a Kickstarter project before here? Okay, cool. So, as I said, I'm Liz Cook. Actually, just a serial backer of Kickstarter projects. Let me know if you have one, and I'll probably back it. I originally come from film distribution and dabbled in a little filmmaking myself prior to coming to Kickstarter. So as you guys know, Kickstarter is essentially a place where people come together to create something to share with others. And we define our parameters pretty broadly, but basically all Kickstarter projects must fit into one of these 15 categories. So whether that's art or film or games or journalism, oftentimes it's kind of a hybrid of a lot of different things. But as long as it fits in sort of one of those categories, it's likely that it'll fit on Kickstarter. And just sort of to give a really broad overview really fast of what has happened in the last 6 years, we've seen over $1.6 billion pledged to over 83,000 successfully funded projects on the site. So we've been seeing a pretty tremendous outpouring of support based on just sort of people getting excited about ideas and wanting to help them come to life. And we've really seen that, people are backing projects from nearly every country on Earth, including all 7 continents. There's this dude in Antarctica named Mr. Fantastic, and he backs a ton of projects from there, and I just love that as a fact. We've also seen, more than 8.6 million backers. And I think the stat that's kind of interesting is that more than 30% of backers have supported one project. So there's actually, a real community of people on the site looking for interesting things to come and support. And, sort of briefly, we've seen a pretty incredible impact in culture. We've seen 8 Kickstarter-funded films nominated for Academy Awards, one of which took home an Oscar in 2013. We've also seen people explore possibilities of addressing the world's issues through pretty interesting, creative ways, like this low-cost landmine detonator. It's actually now currently, or a copy of it is currently displayed in the MoMA's permanent collection in New York. Also in the MoMA collection is this 3D doodler, the 3D printing pen. Have you guys ever used one of these? Oh my God, it's so fun. It's really great. And we've also just seen a lot of interesting sort of cross-cultural collaborations, like these Dutch guys came and painted with a community, painted an entire favela in Rio. And, we've seen at least a dozen Kickstarter projects launch things into space, including somebody sent a slice of pizza on the edge of a rocket ship for a music video. So like very important cutting edge stuff is happening. And so I kind of wanted to speak briefly to film, as we are at a film festival. You know, even since I took this slide a week ago, these numbers have changed, but it's more than 16,400 successfully funded films with, you know, a little over $250 million going towards those. More than 100 of that is for docs, which I think is interesting, and 1.8 million backers. So more stats, fun stats. Over 10% of the slate every year at Sundance, Tribeca, and actually at South by Southwest, it was 1 in 3 films at the competition were Kickstarter funded. And, you know, 8 Oscars and 1/3 of the Oscar shortlist for documentary. Just to sort of give a sense of the scale of what these projects are raising, I thought it was kind of interesting to point out that actually the average raise is around 10K. Sorry, 12K. Average funding goal is around 10. So that's including, you know, people who are doing their first, you know, experimental video with their friends in their parents' basement for like $500, and people who've raised, you know, over several $100,000 for a portion of the production of a major feature film. So today I really wanted to touch on some experimental or interesting cross-media projects that we've seen, especially through the film section of the site. Starting with this really incredible smaller project called Good Luck Soup. It was backed by 142 people. It was created by this guy, Matthew Hashaguchi. And it's basically, I mean, the idea is pretty simple in that it's, he created a map that people could geotag their families' life stories for Japanese American and Japanese Canadian families who've had members in the internment camps in those regions, and sort of map what those stories were, attach videos or pictures, and then also include sort of a point in the map where their family had then relocated to. And it's just sort of a way of sort of collecting all these stories in one place. It was a, you know, fairly modest project. I believe they raised just over $15,000 to put this website together, and I just kind of thought, you know, it's just a nice sort of foray into this sort of collecting stories in interesting ways and sort of inviting communities to take part in gathering that information together. So I actually included a couple of different videos, they're project videos. I might skip this one in the interest of time and go to this project. Everyday Rebellion is part of Power to the Pixel. I'm sure you can talk to this project as well. But, you know, over 720 backers came together to help pull this together. I will put up their video real quick so you can get a sense of what it is. Have any of you guys checked out that website or seen the film at any of the festivals it's screened at? The website's totally awesome. It's really worth looking through. Obviously, they're just like super charming brothers and are very good at articulating what it is that they're doing. But I think that that's such a good example of a Kickstarter project video for something that, you know, is big in concept and in scale, but they make it very sort of bite-sized and attainable, and you get a good sense of, you know, who they are and why they're doing this and why they care about it and why we should care about it in a relatively short video that's just nicely put together. I'll skip this video too, although I love it. I think it's amazing. This is a video game. It's an 8-bit game that the filmmakers put together as a portion of their film. This film, Buzzard, played at South by Southwest and Locarno and a couple of other places. It's been called the office space on crack. It's like really hilarious. This guy is completely hateable and at once likable, worth checking out. But the video game basically follows his character in his attempt to, rage against the machine in the honor of like slackerdom, and it's really great. They raised just over 30,000 from 174 backers. This is the beginning of that crazy video. And then lastly, I wanted to just talk about this project. It was a dual project on Kickstarter. So David Cross, are you guys familiar with the comedian David Cross? Hilarious guy. He distributed a film theatrically throughout the US, raising funds to do that on Kickstarter. He wanted to do it pay what you want, a theatrical release of the film. So he just raised enough to sort of four-wall a bunch of theaters across the US and told people that, for one night, they can come in and literally pay 50 cents or, $100, whatever you want to give. I believe the average ended up being like $9 or something like that, which is pretty good, actually. In any case, so he raised a bunch of money on Kickstarter to do that. But in addition, he had one of the characters in the film run a Kickstarter project, and it was it's a really funny video. I'll cue it up, but essentially it's the character speaking as the character. The rewards are created as rewards that character would care about. And I think that it's just a really playful way of using the platform. You can only really do this if you fully intend on having that character fulfill the rewards. So essentially they just set a $10 million goal, so they knew they would never reach it. I think they ended up raising around $25,000, but nobody's funds were exchanged because Kickstarter is all or nothing. But I thought it was just a really creative way of like engaging further with the story, and I'll cue it up. It's ridiculous. It's called The Great American 1921 Gentleman's Box Company. So, I mean, I also just like that because it's just kind of punking the like Kickstarter video and the whole thing, and it's just so playful and so fun. And as a result, obviously, like this guy didn't like make like 20,000 new cardboard boxes, but what he did was generate a ton of press around that character, around David Cross's film, around David Cross's other project, because bloggers picked it up, people shared it on Facebook, people, this is just something that's very easily, passed around the Twitterverse and like other places like that. So I guess just sort of leave you with the idea that Kickstarter really is just this open platform, and as we're seeing more and more interesting hybrid types of projects, like we really encourage you to think outside the box in terms of what you're putting up there and how you're playing with your ideas. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So thanks to all the speakers. We've got about sort of 20, 25 minutes left for some discussion and questions. So I'm going to kick off first, but please put your hand up if you have any questions. And there are roving mics as well, so wait for the mic to come back. That would be great. So I want to talk a bit about partnerships. I know we're talking about a vast spectrum of different types of projects. So Lili's been talking about sort of new interactive formats and web-native projects. Lisa's talked a lot about different, I guess you talked about film, television, and games, but different sort of like media products and a bit about cross-platform. And Liz, you've talked about the different projects, the spectrum of projects that are raising money in Kickstarter. But it's kind of hard when you're working in the innovation or new format space to build partnerships and co-production and co-finance money. So I want to sort of talk a little bit about the kind of people you're finding working in this space. I'm going to start with Lili, because you mentioned you have a relationship with the National Film Board of Canada, who are also very well known for working in interactive narratives and very experienced in this field, along with ARTE. You mentioned the CNC, the Centre National de Cinéma, so the equivalent of our BFI in France, and also a couple of other partners. Are you finding it's expanding those kind of range of people you can work with, or it's still quite small?
No, it's definitely expanding. I mean, as you mentioned, we really need these partners to make our projects visible, because our goal is really to co-produce innovative content that is seen by as many people as possible, and not as opposed to other broadcasters who might have commercial objectives and people need people to come on their website. So we really try to spread the content as much as possible, and for that we associate with all kind of different partners, especially for distribution. We try to collaborate with media partners. We did that on almost all our web documentaries. We have to try. We try to have content collaboration about articles accompanying our distribution, and what we do and then it really depends on the object. For example, on video games, we really need to collaborate with game publishers, because we definitely don't have the outreach that they have, and we don't have the connections to the video game platforms they have. For example, for California, we work with this game distributor who really has the game. It's a PC Mac game, so it will be distributed through Steam, and we've never done that before. So they have a regular slot on Steam, and they will release it on their slot, and do all the marketing around that. And the same for mobile platforms like the App Store or Google Play Store. So we really try to work on, it really depends on the nature of the project. But for the VR project, it's really essential to have a marketing partnership with Google, to have some collaboration around the Google cardboards and just the tools that make the content accessible.
But are you finding sort of with more, let's say, soft funds or government funds or other broadcasters, it's, making international co-productions, is that still pretty tricky?
Well, actually, it probably is, because we tend to work with the same broadcasters over and over again. So there's the NFB. We would love to co-produce with the BBC, and this is hopefully going to happen with Notes on Blindness, because the film will be broadcasted on the BBC, though we hopefully have a partnership also on the interactive part. But yes, it's difficult, because not all traditional broadcasters have the same funding opportunities than we have. So there's RTS in Switzerland, and yes.
Yeah, and I guess
that's
ARTE
Canada.
And, yeah. And there's a project also that won the prize at the Pixel Market last year. It was a Rebecca O'Brien,
yes.
Ken Loach project that's called The Flickering Flame, which is a digital native autobiography about Ken Loach and the sort of battles he fought around his filmmaking that you're involved in as well. And will that be a collaboration with the UK? Is there anyone you can mention? No.
We will see. Yeah. Yes, I think it's a little bit too early to reveal much of the detail, because it's not done yet, but we hope so.
So it's super interesting you're supporting a British project through a French co-producer. Yeah.
Yes, I mean that happens when the leading producer is French, and that's the case in Notes on Blindness, but also on the Ken Loach project.
On the interactive part.
On the interactive part.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask Liz Cook. So it's terribly confusing, because I purposefully chose everybody was almost called Liz or Lili or Lisa on this panel, just so we could confuse you. Liz, talking about partnerships, do you get approached by broadcasters or funding bodies to ever work with them in partnership with some of their schemes? Has anybody come to you?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different partnerships. We recently launched a partnership with like the New York Times, for example. It's a lot of partnerships that sort of go on to then provide a platform for people who've finished projects on Kickstarter to then like put them out into the world. So like the New York Times is essentially putting out short films that were created on Kickstarter and distributing them on their platform. And, you know, we have a partnership with Sundance, which has been really great actually since the beginning. We had a very early partnership with them. And the way that works, well, there's a lot of different things that go into it, but essentially if there's a Kickstarter project that's a Sundance filmmaker alum, they have a special team devoted to really helping those projects get their outreach out and project out there. And, you know, we have other partnerships like the MoMA Design Store where they've curated their design store with a full collection of Kickstarter-funded things, and it's really been an incredible opportunity for those product designers to have that kind of visibility and stamp of approval. But I mean, in terms of funding bodies and organizations like that, we do often get approached to do that, and what we've seen it sort of manifest, we haven't had any sort of formal partnerships, but we've seen a lot of situations where a funding body will come in and match all funds that were raised on Kickstarter. I think that's a really nice way of participating, but also getting the sort of community engagement aspect with the Kickstarter project. And yeah, that's essentially kind of how it's been working so far.
Great, because it's funny, about 3 years ago in a think tank we did, which involved a number of broadcasters and financiers and soft funds, that was exactly the kind of things we were talking about way back, but we haven't seen anything emerge yet, that they were thinking very much about using Kickstarter or other crowdfunding platforms as a way to see if there was traction in development ideas, which would kind of be great. I mean, you see with sort of Amazon did a trial, I think, didn't they, where they piloted, they let people sort of vote on pilots, ideas. And I kind of think these ideas are super interesting when you're working with a platform that, you know, is all about building traction. And also, I guess you're collecting data as well that's valuable around the audiences, potential audiences and advocates of these projects.
Yeah, I will say that like organizations like Fandor, for example, ran a program recently over this past spring where they had 6 different filmmakers raise funds. They matched up to, I believe, $10,000 of dollars raised, and then they're going to distribute those films as well as sort of like a packaged program that they're putting together with filmmakers.
Cool, great. And I know you started mentioning some of the partnerships, and it's been really the things you can't do as well in Wellcome. In terms of sort of the interactive narrative projects, have you worked with like ARTE or worked with any other partners on those before? Has there been any broadcasters or anyone else you've worked with?
It's a good question. I think we're working on it, but there's some of them, a lot, especially with the development awards that we fund, they're proprietary. So basically they're people's ideas, and we can't really talk about them until they get successfully commissioned. But
I don't think we have collaborated on a project together yet, but it's going to happen.
But what I can say, though, in terms of collaborations, is that we are totally open to other people coming in with funding. We do need to know that there's a UK audience or Republic of Ireland audience, but I don't think it would be a problem if ARTE was coming in or ZDF. And we do have other kinds of partnerships like the World Congress of Science and Factual Producers that I mentioned. We're working with the National Film and Television School, the Science Media Production Unit at Imperial. We actually support media studentships. Next week we're at the Edinburgh Film Festival, bringing Scottish writers and scientists together. If anyone's there, come say hi. In a couple of weeks' time, we're actually, speaking of games, we're at the Develop conference in Brighton. And my colleagues actually work to seek partnerships for the direct activities that we do. I work more so in the grants, indirect funding, so people come to us for money. And the way that I advise people about partnerships is that we want to see that you can have a financial plan in place, and that what you're doing makes a lot of sense for your audiences. So I have lots of people coming to me, and because we're a medical charity and they want to do, for example, and there's nothing wrong with this, a film on disease or cancer or something, and they want to make an interactive website. And the first thing I would say to them, because all I do is ask questions and give advice, like critics, I don't actually create the online stuff myself, but if you were an audience member watching a film about cancer, where would you go for information? If you were in the UK, you would probably go to Cancer Care or Macmillan, and I talked about this earlier in the funding forum. But why would you make a new website and reinvent the wheel when people are looking for specific types of information? So it's really thinking about the platforms that you're making and then setting up your funding models accordingly. So I would recommend, if someone came to me and said, I really want to make an interactive document on X, I'd say, well, what kind of partnerships could you develop? Because oftentimes it's after you've made something that people are willing, if they like it, they'll show it, they'll put it on their website, maybe they'll put some money into it or what have you. But a lot of people don't think about that because they're so close to wanting to make some kind of interactivity. So that's just a little tip. I don't know if that...
No, absolutely, and it fits very much with Lili. You're talking about the partnerships with projects like Fort Money and the newspaper distributors. The sites were super important, weren't they, really, for the success, and the numbers have shown. Mm-hmm. I think in your projects and National Film Board of Canada projects, like the High Rise project, which has just finished, but there are many different sort of elements to it. The part they did, the one before last, was a partnership with the New York Times, and it was seen way more than any of the other components that won many different awards, but was seen in a very niche and community. So those partnerships, I think, totally essential. Distribution is still, platforms is like the key. But please, I'd love to get some questions. We've been talking and you've been very quiet, so please put your hand up. Someone in the front row. And if you could say who you are, sort of very briefly what you do.
Hi, I'm Yasmin. I used to be in biomedical sciences and then in documentary film, and now I'm in interactive media. I really appreciate your the Kickstarter's sort of short videos and how funny they were, and it just showed that you can actually be creative on that platform, because now it's a sort of cliche where people are overly sincere and it's like, we need this for... I wanted to ask the other panel members, what's your take on humour and on, like, creatively telling the story in a way that's not so worthy? Because
worthy, that's a terrible word.
Thank you.
Nobody wants to fund something that's worthy. Unfortunately, that's not true.
Okay. I just, maybe that wasn't, I didn't mention that we also co-produce funny projects. I'm sorry. Because they are more, they're French and French-speaking, so there was no example. But we do, actually, especially in the short series and short series formats, and we love humor in projects. I think it's very important. So.
And you're totally cross-genre as well. You're cross-genre, like you said at the beginning, all those different themes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I skipped probably the first part really quickly, but there would be a lot of examples to show that we consider funny, but
the French are funny. The French are funny.
I think the English are
I think
funnier,
the English could be
but
different. I'm
the
Canadian,
French
so the NFB
try to be funny.
But yes, humour, absolutely.
Yeah.
May I ask Liz a question?
Yeah.
How I don't know if people are going to be brave enough to ask us, how much work is it to do a Kickstarter campaign? Because a lot of people come to Wellcome and they say, oh, we're going to do Kickstarter, and then you say to them, do you know how much work a Kickstarter can? Oh, yeah, it's fine. How much work is a Kickstarter campaign?
It's a lot of work, for sure. But, it's work that you will inevitably be doing when your project is out in the wild and you want it to be distributed and you want people to see it or play with it or have it. So, it's finding your audience. I think the primary, the amount of work is really actually the beginning before you launch, is preparing and making sure you have a strong outreach plan, so you're not just hitting launch and just waiting to see who comes, and you're really actively planning on how you're going to be messaging people. But yeah, it's a lot of work. The cliche is that it's a full-time job, but I can say that it's not, because a lot of us at work run Kickstarter projects while we work, and we do both. But I also will address what you said, and like there are incredible examples of very serious, very cool, intense, tearjerker project videos that really do very well, as you know. So maybe I just like the funny ones for presentations, just personally. But yeah, there's really amazing things that span the spectrum.
And there's nothing wrong with worthy. There isn't anything wrong with worthy. But I think the last adjective any filmmaker wants their film to be, for example, is, oh, it's a worthy film. Wouldn't you rather your film was exciting, sentimental? I don't know. It's just, it usually has such negative connotations. But bring on the funny, bring on the beautiful stories, bring on the tearjerkers.
I mean, it's kind of interesting you say that, because in a way Kickstarter campaigns are part of the sort of like, they're about, you know, what you create for your campaign is part of the story in a way, and it's the way you're creating identity for yourself. So, you know, building your brand, or your identity, or the concept, or the product, and, you know, you have to choose the appropriate way to do that and test it out with people. It's, yeah. Absolutely. And I've seen a number of really funny Kickstarter campaigns about really serious things, and humour obviously works super well. With the juxtaposition of other themes. But please, any more questions from the audience? One over here.
Hello, my name is Santiago Ortiz Monasterio. I'm a filmmaker. I'm from Mexico, and I'm here because I'm in the Dog Connection project that is, it's an initiative that between Mexico and UK for, this is a year of cultural exchange between the two countries. And my question is, do you have any co-productions with Latin America? And for Kickstarter, I don't know how many success projects do you have also in Latin America?
Shall I answer that?
Do you want to start?
About the co-productions? We don't have any co-productions with Latin America because we are mainly focusing on Europe. So we would be probably primarily working with Spain for Spanish-speaking territories, but it's not excluded at all. It just never happened, and there was no project, you know, susceptible to be.
And what about you, Liz?
Oh man, I also have to say, so Kickstarter is open in only certain territories right now for people to create projects. Anybody from around the world can support the projects, but in terms of countries where we're open, we recently just opened in France and Germany, but we've been open in the UK for a long time, and Canada and the Netherlands and Australia and New Zealand. Anyway, I can tell you more, but anyway, nowhere in Latin America yet, but we do have a very aggressive rollout plan to be open in a lot more places soon.
And also with the number of, this is just one, number of Spanish-speaking in North America is so huge, there's, I guess, an appetite for projects. Also, I wanted to tell you about Power to the Pixel this year. We have a partnership with IMCINE, so it's a Mexican Film Institute, and INCA, which is the Argentinian Audiovisual Institute, and many other different partnerships. So the idea is to bring some of these funds and networks and producers to Power to the Pixel so we can start having these conversations, because already in Canada there's a big appetite for working. I know this with the funds that we have partnerships with, who work in experimental and interactive and linear media, of working with the whole of Latin America. It's a market of interest. And I imagine, since you have co-productions across, who knows what projects might emerge. But we often find, you know, by bringing people together, it increases the network and helps both producers and the funding and finance body. So hopefully we will see something. And do you have a crowdfunding campaign, a crowdfunding platform in Mexico or Latin America?
Yeah, its name is Fondeadora, and I recently made a campaign there. I have like how much is in dollars? Like $9,000. We have more money than the money that we expect, and that's it was a lot of work because we have to be like every day and like in Facebook, all your friends and family, like hello, 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 and we have another that it's a very interesting association between the crowdfunding platform and one broadcasting television channel. They have a lab that the name is ARTE, and they participate as another funder. So they're like, if we accept your project, because they chose the projects very carefully, they say like if someone else put you one coin, we put another one. So they are like funding the 50% of. Yeah. So it's like you have more possibilities to fund the amount.
And is that for short content or for what kind of content?
It's audiovisual principal, but they have also like literature, or it's from arts principal.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we have a question over there. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. If you had the mic, we can start with you, since you have the mic, and then we can move backwards.
Sorry, I just had a question. My name is Negar, I'm a French documentary filmmaker, and I had a question about the Wellcome Trust and eligibility. I imagine that the production company has to be English, or the director, or anyone who's, because you were talking about English audience and Irish audience.
I think strictly speaking, you would need a UK bank account, and we encourage co-productions with UK production companies. Mostly it's because we want people who know the landscape and are having these conversations with commissioners and know how to get into the film festivals, etc. We have had companies from Europe, and they've had a co-producer who is English and a UK bank account, and that usually does the trick.
But the subject, for example, the subject
matter can be totally international. I think what's interesting to consider is why any audience within the UK, for example, would be interested in the subject matter if it's international. I think Kickstarter's fascinating because some people really think everyone's going to love their project, and then they get on Kickstarter and nobody's on it, and that could be for a number of reasons, and no one's contributing. But it's always interesting to think about who are your audiences, why would they get commissioned if you're looking for something on television. Yeah, that's it.
Great, and we'll take another question back.
Hi, thank you very much for a very informative talk. My name is Karen Palmer, I'm a digital artist. I've currently got an installation being screened in the Millennium Gallery at the moment. That's why I'm here. It was also screened at the V&A recently too, and it's very important for me to get my work out there. So I've just come back from Sweden.
Called?
Sync Self 2, and it just come back from Sweden and Germany where it was showcased. My work is neuroscience meets wearable tech interactivity film. And my question is particularly to Lisa and Lili, that and this is long as a piece of string, but at what point of development would you like to see a project, even for development funding? What would you expect to see in the application that would be, that would show the potential, that it has potential, and it's something that you'd want to be a part of?
We like to be involved in a very early stage in the conception and the writing and the whole. So we basically even just need an interactive concept from scratch, and then we like to co-develop this. So yes, very early, not in a very advanced production state.
So then you know
but it's better to come with a producer, because we co-produce. We do not produce directly, and we need a producer to be present during the development phase with you.
Great. And Lisa?
Well, there is such a thing as being not developed enough for a development award. And earlier this morning we talked about doing your homework. So the development scheme at the Wellcome Trust is quite competitive. It's up to 10,000. It's quite a lot of money these days. Perhaps the Arts Awards might also be good for you, just from what you've said.
Arts Council as well.
Okay, but in terms of how developed is it? It is chicken egg. We don't pay for retrospective costs. So if you were to do something, we need to have some clear idea about what do you need to get to the next stage. So I always say from point A to point B, and the whole point of the scheme is to get more money or to get a commission. So it's not just development for development's sake. So it's lovely to hear that ARTE are happy to come really, really early. But there's really only two ways you wouldn't get development money from Wellcome. The first way is you don't need it. Just go pitch it somewhere. Okay? And then the second way is that it's never, ever going to happen. You could make it, or for example, that it's never going to get on television, or there's just no confidence that it could actually happen. Which doesn't always happen all the time, but mostly it's a competitive scheme. So you do need to know what it is you need to do to get to the next stage to get more money, if that's helpful.
Thank you. And we've got time for two very quick questions at the second row here. Thank you.
So I have a short question. Lili, in your presentation you mentioned that you're from ARTE France and you have mainly the French productions coming to you. So my question would be, if I'm from Germany as a producer, so how's it with the German market, and how does ARTE position there, or who's the one to talk to?
Who's the one to talk to? I mean, there are people in ARTE Germany and Strasbourg to talk to, so there are people there and they're doing just the same job as I do, and I think there's more and more. There starts to be public funding, so from film funds, also for interactive, so.
But it's in Strasbourg, you have to go, or it depends on the type of project you're making, doesn't it? Yeah. Complicated, ARTE is complicated.
It's really easy in
if
France
you're in ARTE.
Because it's, I mean, it's everything is in Paris and it's centralized, and it's probably a little bit more complicated. There's ARTE ZDF, so it really, there's ARTE ZDF, there's so I don't know where you are and how you are, and maybe this discussion is too long.
I know ZDF ARTE. No, I was interested in particular because I've heard it a lot of times that a lot of projects from France come, and it's always the minority in Germany. So I was wondering if there's.
But I think that's going to change. I really think that we are at the point that.
And that was probably to do with the laws, wasn't it, in Germany, about internet, and it was more restrictions.
Yes, but
yeah,
but it will change. It depends. Like they still could fund cross-media projects, so there needed to be a linear film attached to the interactive.
One very quick last question. Thank you.
Hey, my name is Michael. I've been concerned with crowdfunding from two different sides. The one side is that I produce videos for campaigns, for music campaigns in the first place. And the second one is that I was starting up a production company in Germany and had to do a lot with the crowdfunding scene. And I was wondering, because in the crowdfunding scene I've kind of got to notice that crowdfunding is much more a marketing tool nowadays. It's not about really creating something, but getting an audience and reaching them. And I think you said something like that too, in a way, but go for it. Is this
sorry, because we haven't got much time.
Yeah.
So your question is,
yeah,
can you use it to finance products from the beginning?
No. Is it more like a marketing tool? Like, is it really about the money, or is it about getting some attention?
Do you want to answer that?
Sure, yeah, I'd say it's both. It's crowd and funding. I think that if you don't have one of those, you're missing a big thing. I think that oftentimes the number of backers can be more helpful to you in the long run than the number of dollars raised. But, you know, essentially, like, money makes things happen, and audiences are there to help get the word out. So, like, having both there, I do think that the shift has, you know, people are getting smarter about how to, like you mentioned that it was like a really good opportunity to sort of develop your sense of brand as a filmmaker or an artist, and it is such a public platform that it's that opportunity to say exactly what it is that you're doing, and in that you're really, developing a brand and marketing yourself. People are getting really smart on how to do that.
And I think these words, engagement and marketing and storytelling, are very difficult to separate now as our borders are becoming very blurred, and it's totally essential to demonstrate when you're in such a competitive world that you understand your audience and you have people who are going to donate money to you, not even invest money like other investors. They are your strongest advocates. They're going to be your strongest advocates and help you through the project and help you find other investment. So I find it super interesting, the whole area of crowdfunding and crowd investment, and I think it's something that probably we're going to see a lot more, and combinations of different types of money and different types of media products. So thank you so much to all the panelists for being so candid and sharing so much information. So we should give them a huge round of applause.